Hello everyone, welcome to this new video. Today I'm talking to Jack from Evil Games. I'm Jack, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Jack Wagner, and I'm an indie dev working on a racing game called Zerocar Future Motorsport.
In a nutshell, what kind of game are we talking about?
It's a super fast time attack rally game at the moment. It's basically like imagine Dirt crossed with Wipeout or F-Zero, things like that. You drive electric hypercars at speeds up to 500 miles an hour, and you're basically just setting the fastest lap times in the world, trying to beat all the other drivers.
Why did you choose to make a game like this?
Well, I used to work for Codemasters Racing Studio. I worked on the Dirt series and the Grid series, and basically I just wanted to make a game that was pure speed, like imagine those sort of games, but just nothing, just pure speed, trying to set the fastest lap times. Feel the sensation of speed and danger from that.
Did the game become what you literally planned it to become before the start of development?
Well, it's still in early access, but yeah, I think it's at the point where people get what I'm trying to do, and I think that it's at the point where it's fun to play. There's a long way to go. There's a lot of things I want to add. There's a lot of things that need to be expanded and refined. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how it's going, and I hopefully will be able to continue working on it for another year or so and flesh it out into the game I want it to be. But it's not deviated too much. I mean, fundamentally, it's a very simple idea. It's just cars that drive extremely fast, so it's not changed that much.
What inspired you to become an indie game developer?
Well, I wanted to become a game developer, for a long time, and I went to university, studied a games course. Then I went to work for Codemasters, and after about 3.5 years, my friend, who also was on the same course as me at university, he did a lot of events in Manchester, and he met a lot of indie developers, and it was always really interesting hearing his stories about what those guys were doing, what games they were making, because it was all crazy indie games, things like Gang Beasts, things like that were games that he mentioned. And I thought, that sounds really exciting. So I felt like I'd seen everything that I was going to see at Codemasters, and Dirt Rally was a high note to sort of leave because that's a great game. So I thought, what, I'm going to take the plunge and join his indie team, which was basically just him, me, and another dude I knew from uni. And we just started experimenting with ideas, and eventually came up with a game called Unbox Newbie's Adventure, which is is now out on Switch and Xbox One and PS4 and Steam. It's like a Mario type platformer where you play as a cardboard box. So that's basically the idea. Was just I wanted to make my own games, basically.
So this is not your first game?
No, this will be the first game that I developed by myself. I've worked for Codemasters on the Dirt series and the Grid series, and I worked at Prospect Games in Manchester on Unbox. But this will be the first game I've done myself, and I tried to make as much of it myself as possible. So it's kind of not my first game, but it is really my first game individually.
For what platforms do you intend to release this game?
The game's basically going to be tied to Steam, as far as I can see, because I don't have much in the way of resources. I don't have dev kits for Xbox One or PS4 or Switch, and the leaderboard system and the online stuff is tied to the Steam subsystem. So at the moment, it's looking like it's going to be a Steam-only release on PC. If it becomes popular and people like it, and there's demand for people who want to play it on consoles, then it's probably worth me going down that path. But at the moment, I'm thinking it's going to remain a Steam game.
What do you think is your best attitude in life?
Well, I just like to I think there's a lot to be said for just jumping in and trying things. I know that sounds a bit. If you've got a rough idea of what you're going to do, then jumping in and experiment with it is a good. I think it's a good idea. Especially in this day and age when you're working with things like Unreal 4, I find it much easier to just come up with an idea and then just throw together a prototype and pick apart what's fun about it. And yeah, basically just being proactive. I think I know it's easy to say, but you've got to. I used to have a habit of stressing and fretting a lot over these sort of things before committing to things, and what you end up doing is a lot of time passes and you make things harder for yourself. So I just like to get stuff done, basically, even if it's stuff that you might have to fix a bit later or refine later. Or I think there's a lot to be said for jumping in and trying stuff out.
For how long have you been working on this project?
Well, after Unbox was done, I went to part-time at Prospect Games in February 2017, and that's when I started to sort of mess around with Unreal with a view to making a racing game. So experiment with the vehicle system, and trying to develop a pipeline of making tracks and art assets and things like that would ultimately go in a racing game. And then in April 2017, that's when I left Prospect and went full-time into development and as Evil Games. So it's been about a year and a half, well, a year and 3/4, I think, something like that.
What was your day-to-day process for making this game?
Well, what I do when I wake up is I like to think what will be done by the end of the day. Where's the project heading? What can I accomplish before the day's done? I always like to make sure that the task that I'm doing has a clear purpose. I don't like, because I can't afford to waste time. If I waste a month's worth of work, that's a huge loss. So I have to make sure that everything will eventually, the benefit of it will eventually work into the finished product. So even if you do have to ditch work, you at least benefit from the information and the knowledge you've acquired from doing it. But I always focus on that task until it's done, or it can be revisited later. So, for example, with Zerocar, I'm going to be doing things in phases. I'll release a track, and it'll be phase 1 of that track, and then a few months later I want to revisit it and make the art look better, make the track look nicer, and then revisit it again and make the audio better for it. Sort of iteratively increase the quality of the game over time. And I always try and mix up what tasks I'm doing, because it can be quite monotonous doing the same thing over and over again. So I'll do a track, and then I'll do a car, and then I'll do some programming, and then I'll do some audio, because that way you sort of visiting things afresh. You don't get swamped doing the same sort of task for what feels like forever. Variety is a spice of life, and I think that it goes quite a long way with the work ethic, because it keeps you excited for what you're doing.
Will that be the same for potential future games you will make?
Yes, because Zerocar's gone quite well, and ultimately, it's on Steam, and people seem to be enjoying it so far. So I'm going to be. It's served me well with this project, and I don't see that will change too much for the next game. I know a lot more about Unreal now as well, so there's a lot of things that I can optimize and make things work better, much faster next time.
What were your biggest inspirations for making this game?
Well, the initial idea, I mean, it's not some wacky highfalutin concept. It's just a car that drives very, very fast. But the original idea of a game like that came from Dirt 3, because I joined Dirt 3 towards the end of its development, and they were rounding things off and experiment with the car handling for Grid 2. So there were cars from Grid 2, like Lamborghinis and stuff, that you could drive down rally stages. So I used to just take this Lamborghini down Monte Carlo rally stages in Dirt 3, and it was, you're doing 150 miles an hour down these roads, and it felt incredible. So I thought, I'm going to try and make a game that is focused on this sort of experience, and that's what Zerocar is basically. It's a rally game, but the cars are 500 miles an hour.
I wish they had bring that out as a full game, like.
Yeah, well, it was
Lamborghinis.
It was strange because when you're in the dev console for Codemasters Racing game, you can select any car on any track and all those sort of things through the dev console. And I just stumbled across this Lamborghini, and you could just drive it on any track. So I'd drive it around Kenya and stuff, and it was great because the car was so much faster than all the other rally cars, but it was also really easy to drive, and it is the feeling that I want to go for with Zerocar, because it felt really fast and really dangerous. And that's what I want to go for. I want sensation, speed, and danger, and I want you to look like you're doing, 1,000,000 miles an hour down a country lane, that sort of thing.
What makes the game different from others?
Well, I think it's a lot of it's the speed. I mean, there's a lot of car racing games, there's a lot of rally games, but this game, I want it to look faster than 90% of them. I mean, you can get a fast car in Gran Turismo, but I want Zerocar to feel much faster than in Gran Turismo, and I want it to feel dangerous. And I think it's kind of unique in terms of its setting. It's supposed to be 30 years in the future, so it's a near future sort of Formula E setting, but a Formula E rally sort of thing. So there's not really any of the games like that. I mean, that's quite specific, but it is sort of unique in that respect.
What do you think is the most interesting part of the game?
Well, again, I think apart from the speed, the main challenge of the game is learning how the cars handle and learning the tracks, and then eventually refining those things down until you've set perfect laps and competing with other people's times online. I really like time attack games because it's just you and the car and the track, and you have to nail a perfect lap over and over and over again. And it's that compulsive factor that I want to get. I want people to set a lap time of 31 seconds and then think they know that they can do 29, and then they know they can do 28, and eventually over and over again they set very fast times and they're driving perfectly. And I think that's the most interesting part of the game is knowing that you're improving basically and mastering the game.
What game engine are you using, and why did you decide to work with it?
The game's developed in Unreal Engine 4. When I left Codemasters, Unreal Engine was just starting. It was just made available to the public. And this was back in the day when you had to pay a monthly fee for it, and that's when I started using it to develop. We were making a stealth game at the time, but we realised that was just too big a game, and we entered a game jam, and that's where Unbox sort of came from. So I had a lot of experience. By the end of Unbox, I had a lot of experience in Unreal, and I like Blueprint. It's really good for people like me, for people who are not programmers. I consider myself more of a designer than a programmer, and Blueprint's perfect for me. And it's also really easy to make stuff look really good. I mean, I'm not a game artist, but I can make things that look at least okay, because Unreal just does a lot of the legwork. And it also supports lots of plugins, so the online component, I know nothing about network code or Steam online code, but I can plug a tool in that helps me interface with Steam in ways that I would have had to have learned the hard way, basically, through C++ and a lot of that. So Unreal's been great for me, and it has a vehicle system in it, which I've sort of taken and built on top of. So yeah, and it's just so robust. Like I throw all sorts of stuff at it. One of the tracks is 64 kilometers long, which is huge, and Unreal seems to deal with it fine. It doesn't throw a fit whenever you're trying to work in it. So yeah, Unreal's great. I really like Unreal. I'll probably stick in it with it for every game that I make.
What setbacks did you encounter during the project, and do you feel like you learned anything from them?
I've tried to make everything as iterative as possible so that I never overstretched and end up having to ditch things. So the project went pretty smoothly. There wasn't at any point where I thought, oh no, this is impossible, I have to redesign the game, because ultimately the game is very simple. It's just a car driving around a track. There were a lot of things with the vehicle handling that were tricky, because the car goes so fast that if there was any problem, it would fly into the sky, and it still does that occasionally if you hit a cliff at 500 miles an hour. But I think I've learned a lot about Unreal, and what I'm hoping to do is to go back to the early code that I did and the early stuff that I made and apply that new knowledge and refine it, because there's a lot of things that I did that could have been done better, but now I know, so I can go back and fix those things.
If you could go back in time, what would you do different?
Well, it's mainly processes and methods of how I've made things, like the UI, for instance. I just needed a functional UI so that people could choose a track in a car and play the game, but the way I've done it is it's not ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to revisit that in the next few months and optimize it, try and get it working for controllers properly, and make it look a lot nicer and make it flow a lot better. And a lot of the code as well. I think there's a lot of making things more robust so that it reduces the likelihood of crashes and things like that. But that's all come about just from experience. Like I said, I jumped in and made these systems and made them work. Like the UI, it works. It's not beautiful. It's just functional. But by doing that, now I'm armed with the knowledge to make it actually, hopefully, something that looks quite nice and is quite easy to use.
If you could advise a new indie game developer, what would you tell him?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're starting with a game from scratch, try and keep your idea as high level as possible, I think, because if you go in with a very specific idea, what you'll find is that you've made things very rigid and it's difficult for you to maneuver. You might have an idea for a finished game in your head, but it can be quite difficult to get to that finished idea if you don't tolerate sort of any deviation. So you have to keep a high level idea. Zerocar, I just wanted a car that drove very fast down roads, basically. So the idea is very simple in that respect. It's just drive fast, and that gave me a lot of sort of room to maneuver with what the game would be. So I could refine things. I could take things that are boring and take things that are fun, and try to minimize the boring things and try to expand the fun things. I think feature creep is obviously something that's mentioned a lot, but if you do things iteratively and carefully, and you have a very deliberate approach about what you're adding, then you don't end up overstretching. And also, if you do overstretch, or if you do feel like there's something that you can't do, don't be afraid to ditch it. Because a lot of the time, ditching something, as long as it doesn't affect other systems in the game that rely on it, it can allow you to focus on what really is good about your game. I mean, there's a whole world of advice, and a lot of it's case specific as well. Like let's say you're making a game that's unique. I couldn't really lean in and tell you what you should do differently or what you should do better, because I've never made a game like yours. So yeah, it's a huge question. Like, there's a lot of things, and I think the best sort of advice is given when someone sits down with you and plays your game, and you have specific questions, or they can raise specific points. But there are general things and general points that you should be aware of when you're making a game. But I think the main one really is just try and not overstretch, not try and be overambitious, and focus on a core concept for your game. You know, what's fun about Doom is running around shooting things and getting to the exit. That's a really simple sort of idea, and as long as you make a game that doesn't have things that get in the way of that, it should be a fun game. So, but it's a big question. That there's a lot of ways you can answer that question.
What do you feel is success for an indie game developer?
I think that you should be able to define your own success. I know that's you could say, oh, the game made £10 million, so it's a success, and that's great. But if it's the game, if you hate the game, or if you hate working on it, then maybe, I think as long as people like your game and as long as you're happy with it as well, then it's a success. If your game makes millions of pounds, but you hate it and you hate the time you spent making it, then really it's a bittersweet success at the best. I think the goal really is just to make someone feel like they didn't waste their money on your game. Basically, they made their day 1% better because they like your game, they liked playing it. So yeah, but you have to decide what success is for you, because someone could turn to you and say, "Oh, your game didn't sell 10 billion copies." Well, maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was just to make something that was wacky and fun, and people play it for 5 minutes. So yeah, I wouldn't go to someone and say, "Yo, your game was a failure," because they might not have made it with the same view and goal I would make a game myself.
To make other game developers learn, what resources would you recommend?
Well, it's a great time to make games, especially as an indie developer, because there's so many resources on YouTube, and whenever I run into an issue in Unreal, there's lots of YouTube videos. There's also the Answer Hub. I've never actually asked the question on the Answer Hub, because whenever I go there, someone else has already gone through the same problem I've gone through. So yeah, those sort of resources are really useful. Yeah, that's basically what I recommend. I mean, YouTube and the Epic Answer Hub. If you've got a specific problem, then you can always ask there. And I've had people who I've worked with who've done that, and people have got back to them. So it's a good time because of the state of the internet's in now. You can find out a specific solution to your specific problem quite easily.
What do you think about the current marketing strategies in the indie game industry?
It's a difficult one, because visibility is the most difficult issue, I think, at the moment. There's so many games coming out, and there's so many ways in which people can play games, that I think ultimately, unless you've got millions of pounds to spend marketing your game, you're gonna have to accept that it's gonna disappear quickly, or it's gonna be hard to find. But then on the flip side, it's if people like the niche that your game exists in. So with Zerocar, it's a racing game. I think if people want racing games, they might stumble across it eventually. This is something that I'm trying to contend with. I mean, I don't have any money for marketing. I'm not very good on social media, and I don't really have an online presence. So it's a question that I'm not really an expert in answering. But I think as long as people see your game, when people see your game, I mean, I don't know, it's difficult to get people to see your game, but if they do see your game, I think they need to know that it's, you know, it's not just a throwaway thing, that it's not dead, and that, especially if it's early access, people need to know that you're still working on it. But I also think that immediacy is good because Discord and things allow people to speak to you. So a lot of people set up Discord servers for their games, and people can discuss them. I think that's a good thing. I think what I'm going to do next, which I think will be a better way of marketing games, is I'm going to make prototypes of games, and instead of spending a year in a room making the game like I did with Zerocar, I'm going to immediately, as soon as there's something funny, just put a GIF or a video of the game and just show people it, and just get feedback straight away, because then you can build up a bit of a community around your next idea. It's a tricky question though. I mean, it's not really something that I'm an expert in.
Where do you see the indie game market going in a few years?
I think because there's a lot of indie games being released, there's so many of them, it's going to be a tough time for teams that are larger teams that bank a lot on making a big hit, because if they don't, it's, you know, they've got more to lose basically. I'm a lone dev, so every sale helps me out, and every retweet and every, you know, an interview like this would help me a lot. It goes a long way. But if you're a team who's sunk a lot of money into something, then you need the big wins, you need the big victories. And I think that you'll see a lot of micro teams and a lot of micro, you know, one man outfit or teams of less than 5 people making games, because the tools are so good now, and the resources are out there. I think that's what we're going to start seeing. We're going to start to see a lot of games that look really good, made by, you know, 2 people in a room, but they look really, really good and play really well. So, yeah, I think that it's an interesting time, because there's just so much going on. I think we'll see almost like game developers as authors or that sort of thing.
Which indie game developers, if any, offered you any support or knowledge for creating the game?
Well, I used to work for a company called Prospect Games in Manchester, and they've got a lot of experience in Unreal 4 development now. They ported the game to Switch. They ported Unbox, to Switch and PS4 and Xbox One. So they have a lot of experience in Unreal. They've done VR things. They're doing netcode stuff. So they are my first port of call if I have any issues with Unreal.
Is there an AAA studio you would work for if you could?
There's a lot of places I like to work because there's a lot of games that, you know, I like. But it's a tricky question, because what makes a company good to work for is, you know, the culture of it. I'd like to work on Rockstar games like Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto, because their games are fantastic. And I'd like to work for Relic, you know, working on Company Heroes, maybe Bohemia Interactive on the Armour series, or Tripwire, because I really like their games. But it's I'm just basing that on the games they make. It's the culture of a company and the attitude and the lifestyle you get. I think that makes a company a good place to work.
Which game do you wish you had worked on?
Well, there's legendary games like Deus Ex and Metal Gear Solid or the original Thief. I don't know. It's a really tricky one. There's so many games. What you really want to work on, I think, is one that is memorable, basically, that people remember. So I think something like Deus Ex, just because the original Deus Ex was really special and people still play it today. I still play it, and to work on something like that would be, it'd be like, yeah, you'd be a part of something much bigger than just making a game.
Did you have any gaming education at school, or did you learn the whole development process on your own?
I did go to a games course at university, so I learned a lot there, but a lot of it is self-taught. I mean, learning things like the software and Unreal. I suppose that's the default way of learning now, because there's so many resources online available, YouTube and things. You don't need to do a course in Unreal to get good. They kind of build their own courses online. You know, I think they have a series of tutorials and things. But it's a lot of it is just experimenting and messing around. And yeah, I'd say I'd describe myself as sort of 50% self-taught.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in North Wales, and that's actually sort of the inspiration for the next stage in Zerocar. So, yeah, North Wales.
What were your childhood interests?
I liked skateboarding. I liked motorsport. The military. I was big in the army, and I thought that would be a good career back in the day. And video games and video game development as well. That's what I sort of messed around with.
What is your favorite video game of all time?
I never have a favorite of all time because it depends on the mood. But things like Thief 2, Deus Ex. I really like Jagged Alliance 2. I think that's a brilliant game. I only played that like 3 years ago, but it came out, I think, in the 90s. Fantastic game. Doom 2. That was very important to me because that was like the first shooter that I played. Medal of Honor on PlayStation 1 because I think that was one of the first sort of console FPS. It probably wasn't, but it was the first one I played. Metal Gear Solid just because of just how amazing that game is. There's so many great games. I can't really think.
What is your favorite video game of this year and why?
I don't know. This year, I've mostly been working on Zerocar this year, and I don't really know if I've played any games that have come out this year at all. I've mainly been playing Tekken 7, which came out last year, but that game's fantastic, and you can easily get a year's worth of playtime out of that in the blink of an eye, But I think Red Dead 2 is going to be my favourite game of this year.
Okay, I am out of questions. Do you have other things you want to say?
No, that's all good with me.
Okay, for the viewers, all the links to the social media and everything from Jack are in the description below.